Kurt Moyer is way in the back. And 3 years ago, the first senior reading of the year was Kurt's, as well as James Kelly and Meredith Blankenship and Brian White. And Aaron and I went. And yeah, that was an experience. So it's really nice. Everything's come full circle. Time, it passes. So I wasn't going to be sentimental, but thanks everyone for coming out. It's cool to scan across this room and know that I seriously care about more than 2/3 of you. So I don't know. Sorry. I just
But that 1/3.
So I'm going to be reading out of my chapbook, my senior chapbook, which I made specifically so I could read out of it. It's called Slowly My Strings. There's copies over here if you'd like one later. And if you have one, feel free to read along. And it's broken up into 6 sections, one for every year of college and one for each of the big projects I did. So I'm going to read first from freshman year, and there's only one poem in this section. I don't really think that's that surprising. And this is for my friend Jeremy. It's called Slowly My Strings Tangled into Knots. And it's an acrostic poem in 4 ways. If you read the first letter of each line spells out slowly my strings tangled into knots. The last letter of each line spells out slowly my strings tangled into knots. And the first and last lines are slowly my strings tangled into knots. Slowly my strings tangled into knots. Lilac blushes filled your face full of these quiet murmurs without ado, when fibers force their friction to thaw lone thighs of their frozen lull. You, the center of the spindle. Lovely moving twist of hips. Move to the loom. You are woven and layered, a sunset in orangey silks and cottons. We mix these things to convenience your skin that requires such smoothness with other, softer, integral parts. We blend your spices like delicate chai, neatly arranged, and then grounded and dyed in a mortar, hung by a peg, slightly crooked on my wall. But in winter, I wish you were made of wools, thick with warmth, laid across my bed, a blanket around my frame. Instead, I leave you on the wall, the aroma nearly gone from when I left you to dry in the sun. I lean in close to examine the sewn gashes in parallel lines, 2 by 2 around your elbow and your leg, little red threads wound tightly around them to make sure it won't unravel. Embroidered into your sunset pattern, I make delicate little silhouettes of tree branches, constructed illogically so the trees have no roots. I knot the thread in semi-nooses that sit lightly. I comb the wool of my hands and spin tight yarns of my arms and shoulders so that we may knit over and under and cover what we have. What can we do, kaleidoscoping our yarns together? We leave some tight, some slack, not leaving a map of how to unsnarl this contorted skein. Oscillating between the needles duo, taking care to make a deliberate hit, slowly my strings tangled into knots. So the next one I'm going to read is from sophomore year, and it's called Clockwork. Clockwork. Hit the snooze button on your time-bomb body. Let's hold off before the magnets click together and there's a tiny spark before there's nothing at all. Sometimes when I hear the gearworks turning outside of my window, I talk to myself, mouth bitter, dry, the words pine needles in my cheeks. Is your mouth like that now? A pile of tinder, pine cone teeth? While you sleep, I imagine you like this, carved out of oak. The inside filled only with the sound of a constant talk. I want those last seconds to be mine. It is because of you that I've learned how to count. So I had this thing sophomore year where I was writing love poems to a bunch of girls, and they were all girls that went to Susquehanna, so I called it Girls from the River School. And this is actually one of the only girls that isn't from Susquehanna, but I wrote a poem about her anyway. And what I did was, I wrote these love poems, and they were really sweet and nice or whatever, and I was like, I don't know what I can do with these. And so I reread Quarantine by Brian Henry in Carla's class, and in the second half of that, he takes the language and repeats it backwards and cuts out some of the words. and it's a lot creepier. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll just kill them off in the second half. And that's what I did. So these are the two halves of that. This is a love poem for, oh, and this is Randy's favorite, so this is for you. This is a love poem for Tara Elizabeth Lynn, Clementine Devine. A heavy bottom glass tipping over. That's what it felt like when her head dropped to my shoulder. She is all things orange. Clementines peeled in a single spiral, sewn back together with red thread, left on the sill for winter. Thai tea swirled with clouds of rice milk, blooming underneath my tongue, forever staining the white cuffs of my shirt. Peach pie out of season, frozen months before and discovered under bags of vacuum-sealed corn, the bottom burned black when it was finally baked. A heavy bottom glass tipping over. That's what it felt like when her head dropped into my lap. She was suspended there, airy, like silk scarves, and then sunk. The tint of tainted orange and a sanitized feeling that I just couldn't scrub off. Andy had said, everyone knows girls are like fireflies. But it wasn't until I felt her leave that I knew he meant grasping for light that goes dark in your palm. Tara. Dark in your grasping that goes until I knew I just couldn't. Tainted and sanitized, she was suspended. Her head dropped, tipping over. Frozen months before and discovered, sewn back together.
Ooh.
That's what it felt like. And that's also sort of for you, Tom. You gave me that Firefly one.
I was actually Nadine Gordon about that.
Oh, really? Well, thanks, Nadine. So this poem's called In Waking. It was published in Rivercraft last year. Funny story, read this last year at Rivercraft when my knee was messed up, and two different people, Patriot News and William Hoffacker, wrote in like when they were talking about me reading it, called it In Walking. When like I couldn't walk because of my knee. Thanks, guys. And Gary claims that that Plain China wants this, which is this magazine that goes through all the undergrad magazines, but they haven't emailed me yet, so no promises there. Here we go. 1. We were flooding from the outside in, the world watery and slick. I retreat to a room with low lights, high ceilings. I find my mother in a corner, my sister's head in her lap. My mother takes my hands. She's been dead so long, she's made of skin and water. I can feel it sloshing in her grasp. She tells me that it's okay. She knows my sister is sorry. And that's when the windows give, and we are all in the water, and my mother is drowning again, my sister floating. And when I reach up down for them, their hands dissolve at my touch. I cannot breathe. But now we are all dead. But now we are all together. 2. My sister is in the grocery store carrying a blue folder. Inside is a very thin bar of chocolate. I know that it's stolen. I know that she is eating it like a secret she won't keep. I tell her what I saw in my mind, and she cannot even touch me. She so wants the acceptance, like the chocolate bar. Our mother has been dead for so long now. My sister clasps her arms around the folder to her chest, where she falls into my wingspan, crying and safe, and lets herself accordion fold into oblivion, her shoulders touching, then her ribs, until she is nothing in my arms, and I am holding my hands to my sides. In waking, my sister's room is locked and empty, but the sunlight sneaking through the doorframe helps me believe that she's still inside.